these to you. It's very chilly in this room. I think I'll just go ahead and get started. I'm doing another low visual video so that you can focus on the sound of my voice and let it drown out anything going on in your head or any internal monologue. I know that's what keeps me from going to sleep. So just close your eyes and listen. So we were reading about Paul Bunyan. I think we'll continue to do that. This story is about Babe, the blue ox. And the blue ox is the friend of Paul Bunyan. Don't remember if I said that in the last video. Okay. One day, when Paul was working in his father's logging camp in the Maine woods, it started to snow. Day after day, the soft, fluffy snowflakes fell until the entire camp was covered with a blanket of snow. Log cabins disappeared from sight, and all but the tallest trees were buried under great snowdrifts. And the strangest thing of all was that the snow, instead of being white, was a bright sapphire blue. For miles and miles, as far as one could see, the forest was covered with beautiful blue snow. Loggers even today remember that year and call it the winter of the blue snow. When the snow had stopped falling, Paul put on his snowshoes and went out to find wood for his fireplace. As he was returning, he noticed two little ears sticking up through a snowdrift. It must be some poor animal lost and freezing to death, thought Paul. He reached down with one of his great hands and scooped the little thing out of the snow. It was a baby ox calf with thin, wobbly legs. Paul put the little calf inside one of his large pockets and took him home. Soon he was curled up in front of the fireplace and happy and as warm as could be. "Poor little baby," said Paul, as the calf drank some warm milk and gratefully caressed Paul's hands with his tongue. Paul decided to call the little calf Babe and keep him for a pet. The strangest thing about Babe was that even after he'd become thawed, his coat remained a soft, glossy blue. Paul nursed his new pet back to health, but his color never changed. The winter of the blue snow had colored him blue, and blue he remained forever. Babe followed Paul wherever he went and grew larger every day. Every time Paul looked around, the little calf seemed to have grown a foot taller. In the spring, Paul built a little barn for Babe and put the calf inside for the night. The next morning, the barn was gone, and so was the little blue calf. Paul searched high and low. Finally, he found Babe calmly eating grass in the neighborhood valley, with the barn perched right there on his back. He had outgrown it in a single night. Paul became very fond of Babe and took him on all of his adventures in the woods. He grew by leaps and bounds and soon was almost as large as Paul himself. Woodsmen tell us that when Babe was fully grown, he measured 42 axe handles between the eyes. His appetite was tremendous. Every evening he ate 1.5 tons of hay. Even then he wouldn't be satisfied to go to bed unless he'd had 3 wagon loads of turnips for dessert. Paul taught him to help at the logging in the woods and would give him an 80-pound lump of sugar if he'd been a good ox during the day. Babe was always full of mischief, however. He liked to roar and stamp his feet at night, so the men would run out of the bunkhouses where they slept, thinking it was an earthquake. When Paul scolded him for it, Babe only chuckled to himself and pretended that he was asleep. Once, when Babe was standing beside the cookhouse, he winked at Paul and put his head in the cookhouse window. Babe gave a great sneeze and blew a whole barrel of flour over Hot Biscuit Slim, the cook, and his helper, Cream Puff Fatty. Babe was very useful in many ways. For instance, Paul had a lot of trouble with the crooked, twisting road that wound in and out through the forest. He finally tied one end of the road to a large stump and hitched Babe to the other end with a large logging train. Babe dug his great hoofs in the ground and strained and tugged until he'd pulled the entire road straight. It was a mighty feat of strength. In doing it, he stretched the heavy iron links of the logging chain until it was a single iron bar. During his first summer, Babe became fat and lazy, and one day refused to pull the logs down the road to the river. He wanted to wait until winter, when there was snow on the ground and the logs would slide easier. Paul didn't say a word, but that night he had the men secretly whitewash the road. The next morning, Babe thought it was snow and pulled the logs without further trouble. When winter finally came again and covered the Maine woods with beautiful white snow, Babe was the happiest ox in the world. He loved to roam through the woods on the new snowshoes that Paul had given him for his first birthday. The greatest trouble Paul had that winter was finding enough food for Babe, who was getting thin. One day he thought of a great idea and called Ole, the big Swede. Ole was the camp blacksmith, and next to Paul, the largest man in the camp. Ole, he said, I want you to make the largest pair of green eyeglasses in the world. When Ole finished, Paul put the glasses on Babe, strapping them over his nose. He then turned Babe out to the snow again. To Babe, with his new green glasses, all the snow looked like nice green grass. He ate and grew fat and healthy in no time at all. In all the woods, there was no one so kindly toward Babe as Paul Bunyan, and no ox was ever as faithful to its master as Babe, the famous blue ox. I like that one. This one's really short too, so I think we'll read it. It's called Pipeline Days, also about Paul Bunyan. This is the intro to this story. It's a little known fact that besides working as a logger, Paul Bunyan also made a name for himself drilling for oil on the American South. The following story is written as a conversation among Paul's acquaintances that evolves into a bragging contest. Say, said Fat, did any of you guys ever see Paul Bunyan in a poker game? The cards he used were so big that it took a man 5 hours to walk around one of them. Paul used to play a lot of poker that time we would dig in Lake Michigan to mix concrete in when he was building the Rocky Mountains. A little while after we dug Lake Superior for the slush pit for one of them big wells we was drilling. Any of you birds want to come play some poker? You know so much about Paul Bunyan, said the contender. Did you ever hear about the big steer he had? He called her Babe, and she just measured 42 pick handle lengths and the width of a size 7 derby hat between the eyes. And strong? Why, that steer could pull anything. I remember one time when we were drilling a well down Breckenridge. Wasn't much of a hole, just 16 inches. Well, we drilled and never did strike nothing, except dust, and But God's plenty of that. So finally, Paul said we might as well give up. Give it up as a dry hole and let it go at that. But Paul was mad. He swore around for 2 or 3 days and smashed the derrick into kindling wood and was about to quit drilling completely when he saw an advertisement in the paper by some bird out on the plains that wanted to buy some post holes. 10,000 post holes. He wanted 10,000 holes 3 feet long. Well, Paul, he hitched a chain around this duster, this dry well, and hooked Babe up and pulled 15,000 feet of it out of the ground. He got mad again because the hole broke off and left over half of it in the ground. But directly he said that there wasn't no use of a post hole being 16 inches across. So he just quartered the hole and sawed it up into the right lengths. I worked for Paul on one of them deep wells once, said Fat. It was out in Arkansas. Jimmy Blue was running the rig and we was drilling with standard tools. We got down 30,000 feet and struck a rock formation that a bit wouldn't touch. And we was using pretty good sized bits too, drilling a 50-inch hole. Well, we worked on this formation for 3 weeks without doing any good, and then we called up Paul. Paul, he come out there and took charge of the rig himself and worked for 3 more weeks, day and night, without doing anything except ruin a lot of bits. And finally, he got so mad that he jumped down on the derrick floor and pulled up the bit with his hands. Then he threw it into the hole as hard as he could throw it. Well, we busted the rock that time. The bit just kept going, and when a line was run, it pulled the derrick, the rig, and all in the hole after it. We got a gusher that time. But when Paul seen that rig had pulled Jimmy into the hole with it, he was just about to plug off the hole and abandon it. But in a few days, we got a telegram from Jimmy in China saying he'd had a 100,000 barrel gusher and was spudding in on another location. Did any of you guys work for Paul on that big line he laid? Asked the contender. Well, I worked for him on the 100-inch aluminum line that he laid out from Pennsylvania to California. We laid it to pipe buttermilk out to his camp out there. Paul liked buttermilk so well himself that he had a 24-inch petcock running wide open all the time to catch enough for him to drink. Yeah, said Fat, I know all about that. I helped Paul drill the buttermilk well that finished that line. We drilled down 32,000 feet and then struck a formation of cornbread. We drilled down 500 feet through the cornbread and then for 1,200 feet through solid turnip greens, except that every few feet would be a layer of fried sow belly. That's where the old song started. Cornbread, buttermilk, and good old turnip greens. The contender put in. Did you ever hear about the cattle line that Paul Bunyan laid from his ranch to Chicago? Well, Paul, he got tired of paying such high freight to get his stock to the market, so he just laid a pipeline all the way to the stockyards in Chicago and pumped them through it. Everything went all right except the pipe was so big that the calves and half-grown yearlings would get lost in the threads and starve to death before they could get to the outside. And one time, the line sprung a leak, and Paul lost 35 carloads of cattle before he could get it corked. But he sure did do a good job of corking it when he got to it. How the devil did he cork a hole that big? Asked Fat after a minute or two. Why, with bullshit, you old windbag. Same that you've been spouting off. They're bragging about all the things that Paul Bunyan can do. Two stories is enough for one night. I like this book. I hope that you do too. and have sweet, sweet dreams of Paul Bunyan and his big blue ox, who in one story was a boy and in another story was a girl. So, it's the nature of folktale, I guess. Gender changes. Sleep well.